So hey folks, welcome to the final module of the Venus retrograde course. Today we're going to spend a little time looking at some prayers to Venus and also some comments that come to us from some more recent but important magicians and astrologers in their own right about the aspects of Venus whenever she's in her morning star expression. And then we'll spend a little time looking at some coming features of Venus's cycle, as well as some things to do with what we can expect for the future and in my next course. So, without further ado, I wanted to start out with the Orphic Hymn, and this is one of my favorite versions of the Orphic Hymn that's translated from two scholars, Anthanaskis and Wolkov. What I wanted to read to you, if you've never heard it, is part of their praise to Aphrodite. Heavenly smiling Aphrodite, praised in many hymns, sea-born revered goddess of generation, you like night long reveal. You couple lovers at night, O scheming mother of necessity. Everything comes from you. You have yoked the world. You control all through realms. You give birth to all, to everything in heaven, to everything upon the fruitful earth, to everything in the depths of the sea. O venerable companion of Bacchus, you delight in festivities, so bride-like mother of the Erites. O persuasion whose joy is in the bed of love, secretive giver of grace, visible and invisible, lovely tressed daughter of a noble father, bridal feast companion of the gods, sceptered she-wolf, beloved and man-loving, giver of birth and life, your maddening love charms yoke mortals, they yoke the many races of beast to unbridled passion. Come, O goddess born in Cypros, you may be on Olympus, O Queen, exulting in the beauty of your face. You may be in Syria, country of fine frankincense. You may be driving your golden chariot in the plain. You may lord it over Egypt's fertile riverbed. Come, whether you ride your swan-drawn chariot over the sea's billows, joining the creatures of the deep as they dance in circles, or on land, in the company of the dark-faced nymphs, as light-footed they frisk over the sandy beaches. Come, lady, even if you are in Cyprus that cherishes you, where fair maidens and chaste brides throughout the year sing of you, O blessed one, as they sing of immortal pure Adonis. Come, O beautiful, O comely goddess, I summon you with holy words, I summon you with a pious soul. So one, it has some really beautiful phrases in it. And it has some things that really point to some of Venus's basic, the significations, in astrology at least, that we often associate with Venus. That she's the goddess of generation, that she gives birth to all, everything in heaven and everything upon earth and in the sea. We also see some of the other features. One thing I always loved was the phrase she-wolf in there, because I think that's hinting at some other features of Venus that are not often drawn out. I also love your maddening love charms yoke mortals. They yoke the many races of beasts to unbridled passion. Sort of tying it almost to a Dionysian theme there of the way in which she can influence others. And then, of course, I'm always drawn to, the ways in which the Orphic Hymn ties her to certain places and certain features. And then in particular, I love this idea of this swan-drawn chariot over the sea's billows, joining the creatures of the deep as they dance in circles. So this idea, again, of her being tied to something that is much deeper, much more hidden, more primordial. Yes. And I wanted to share another, which comes from the Latin of the originally of Arabic origin, but of the Gayat al-Hakim, which is later translated into Latin from Arabic, and becomes what we know as the Picatrix. And I think the Picatrix is so important because it is such a pivotal medieval treatise on astral magic, and I would recommend this translation by Dan Attrell and David Poreka, which is a really nice hardbound copy of the Picatrix. And I just wanted to read the invocation to Venus here. O Venus, you who are the spirit of love, builder of friendships, and the jewel of intimacy. From you proceeds the power of taste and love. From you flow good friendship and enjoyment between individuals. Through you, the spirits seeking evil are clumped up, and those seeking good overflow. You are the source of love's intimacy between men and women. You are the root of procreation. You attract the spirit of one toward the other, and through you they are conjoined. Spirits are disposed toward loving one another by your power. O Venus, you who are beautiful, you who give the power of love's intimacy to those calling upon you by your will. I beseech you by your names, by the name of God, sublime and on high, who created you and moves you in your sphere, by your light and the firmament of your reign and potency, so that you may heed my prayer and request on account. I ask and beg that you turn these things around for me regarding their love and friendship, and that out of all your spirits and powers you pass over them their spirit, the spirit of their essence and of their prayer. May all their spirits and acts of will toward me be rectified through you. By your motion and robust potency, may you move toward me like fire and violent wind. I conjure you and your spirits, you who are truthful in your friendships and loves, beautiful and steadfast in your social interactions, your spirits who create loving relationships and sexual intercourse and move the power of delight and vice in the mind and bring about love. By all those things I conjure you so that you heed and take note of my request and prayer. I conjure you by your brightness and light, that you may pour the yearning for luxury, vice, and friendship into my heart and will. Heed my dealings so that you receive my request, fulfill my desire in what I seek, and transmit to me by your light, power, and love what I need to perceive, how you receive my request regarding these things. You are the one who joins hearts together, who conjoins and unites love and acts of goodwill. May you bring about joy, comfort, and delight. May you receive complete and whole salutations forever. Amen. So I think, one thing we have to keep in mind is the context. The prayers in the Picatrix are written during a monotheistic time that's very influenced by Islam. And the Orphic hymns are written within the Orphic tradition, which was an initiatic tradition that we know was in existence for several hundreds of years in Greece. So one thing I wanted to point out from there is two things that, they both point to, one, definitely Venus's ability to influence our social cohesion and our ability to have friendships and love and also desirous types of experiences come into our life. And on that edge of the desirous is also that idea of the in the Picatrix it's translated as vice. And I think one thing that's interesting about this in particular is that it's not necessarily something that, because normally, vice is referring to that idea of immoral or wicked behavior, and it actually is asking that these things come to them. So it's almost a desire to kind of point the qualities that we do associate with a positive form of sociality, you might say, but then also this sort of aspect that is related to desire that we might think of as almost inappropriate in a certain way. And this leads me to some of the last stuff I want to read. Now, if you haven't come across it yet, this collection of essays, The Celestial Art, which is edited by Austin Coppock and Daniel Schulke, this is a great collection of essays. And in the back, Daniel Schulke, he actually gives an overview of it's called the planetary viscera of witchcraft. And what I find really interesting about this is a short article, but in this article, what I do find really interesting is looking at the early modern period, and it's the stories and the images that we know that are coming through certain planets that relate to darker themes in terms of, in this case, in terms of witchcraft. He's immediately talking about some concepts of Venus. And before I go into those, he mentions the idea that Venus commands the vigor of growth and procreation, which we've also seen, and also extends her authority into the realm of witchcraft. One thing is that she definitely presides over, the affairs of women, but also sexual pleasure and allure, as well as appearance, aesthetic, and marriage. So it's erotic sorcery and love potions that are really her domain, and they're the interface in which Venus has with the witch. We're often talking about this magnetic quality that we sometimes also associate with witches, that their ability to appear alluring and beautiful, and maybe this idea of magic that's related to glamour. So he quotes here. He quotes problematic. He's quoting Aleister Crowley, who we know through the history of magic. He's one of those names that is both scorned and revered in the history of magic. But I think it's an important one to address because of the influence and the influence and the history that he had, the hand that he had really in the modern magical tradition. But we can talk as well about this little quote here, because I think it shows some of the issues that we can start to approach when we're thinking about Venus as morning star, which is the Aleister Crowley writing about a poorly placed Venus. He's saying a badly afflicted Venus will often cause the native to be profligate, indolent, without shame, and wholly abandoned and open to every species of lust and depravity. So that's coming from his General Principles of Astrology, which was originally published in 1927. So what we can see here is this idea of the moral quality that sort of immediately comes to the fore when we're talking about Venus as a morning star, or poorly placed in this case. But that would be, one of the conditions that Venus does not rejoice in. She does not rejoice as a morning star if you look at the traditional Hellenistic take on it. And I think what we have to keep in mind there is the history of the history to which Venus as a planetary form is tied. And whenever I bring this up, what I'm really referring to is the fact that she is tied to something that patriarchal societies, and in particular patriarchal societies who have a monotheistic patriarchal religion, would not be comfortable with, which is the untamed power of sexual desire and the power of the body in particular, and the allure that the body has. And I think already it's taken the form of this kind of unbridled physical attraction is sort of embodied in the goddess Inanna Ishtar, at least in the area of the cultures that we associate with the area of ancient Mesopotamia. One, because she rules over the hearts of all. And even later in the Greek tradition, Aphrodite was known to have power over all the other gods except for three, who didn't have much interest in the things that she was related to, such as Artemis, who had no interest in fun and games and the things like those such things, and Athena as well, who also sort of seems immune to Aphrodite's influence. But everyone else is under her sway. And you can see how important it is to sort of have some control over that power, which can really control everything else, and how it is able to, I guess, because of its uncontrolled nature, it's able to exert some form of primal authority over everything else. And it's interesting to me how Venus negatively placed, and I guess when we're saying afflicted, you can look from an astrological perspective at affliction in lots of different ways. I think that Crowley's not necessarily just talking about Venus as morning star, maybe also having hard aspects from Saturn and Mars, maybe also being in a difficult house placement, since he's probably referring to natal astrology. But what I want to mention as well is that what I'm trying to draw to our attention here is the level to which this aspect of an assertive feminine divine power that has authority over social cohesion and has authority over primal desire is feared and wanted to be, is under, there's a lot of pressure to control these types of things. And I think, without turning it into a different kind of talk, we can just sort of bring into that the repression of sexuality, but also the repression of desire in general, and specifically the protection that many cultures, the length at which they go to sort of protect everyone from the seductive power of the body, but in particular the body of women. So all that being said, it brings me to the direction that I've really gone whenever I've been thinking about Venus as morning star, is this return to the idea of this power that comes from a sort of form of erotic sorcery. And again, this may not be the level that you go with it, but this is just some of the things that I've been encountering whenever I think about Inanna of the morning. And so to me, there is, like, in this morning star phase, there is a return to the physical realm. There is a focus on the flesh and the embodied flesh, especially, and the pleasure that the embodied flesh is sort of compelled by. Yeah, so for me, it's really compelled me a lot to do a lot of the embodiment work that I have done in the past, and actually have done a lot of this work associated with the Venus retrogrades. It's been, I think, in many ways like a return to the body, and even the idea of what has really struck me so much about Venus's time in Gemini and the retrograde in Gemini is the practices, the embodiment practices that I have to do to connect my voice once again, my speaking with my heart, and also my listening with my own heart. And I think this way in which our senses are so intimately tied up with this space that exists between consciousness and the body and all of these things, I think it really highlights this for me as well. But yeah, return to it, and a return in some ways to this form of an empowered eroticism, if you will. At least that's where it's gone for me. I thought I would share that. I won't go into detail. I just thought that I would share that with you because I think that it's one that often can get neglected, and I think it really resonates with some of the symbolism that's there behind Morning Star Venus and the stories that are related to the different god forms that really, and spirits that are related to Venus as morning star. So I wanted to draw attention to a couple things. One, we know that on the 25th, so coming soon, is Venus's direct station. We know already, that this means that Venus will have gone as far back into Gemini as she possibly can, and that she will begin to advance forward from there. Now, when a planet stations, it slows down. So this has already started. Venus has started to even slow down even more in her apparent motion, to the point that she will stand still in the sky, and then from standing still will go direct. And that's happening at 5 degrees of Gemini. Now, if we move forward, the next big thing within the Venus retrograde moving forward now story is around the square to Neptune will come into effect. But it takes a long time because that square occurred at 20 Gemini, so that won't come into effect until July 27th. Now, before then, something that we do have, and I apologize on the original dates that I gave you, I did my due diligence to try to look everything as precise as I could. But I did find some dates that sort of contradicted the moment of greatest brilliancy. It does look like that period of greatest brilliancy to actually get out and catch sight of this morning star Venus, if you haven't yet, is going to be from July 8th to July 10th of 2020, sometime, of course, before dawn. So refer to there are many really great sky watching apps that you can refer to if you want to use one of them to be able to time a moment to go out and see Venus as a morning star. But if you've never done it before, it's a really beautiful thing to see, and you can see why she is called the ruler of dawn and of twilight. And before we really finished there's a couple last things I wanted to say. Is sometimes in certain medieval texts they often will refer to Venus while she's already getting close to turning retrograde or direct, and when she first when a planet first stations direct, they're becoming like it's like they're often compared to being a sick person who is getting better and who is about to make a turn for the best. So in terms of the expressions that maybe you're seeing in the world around us and also your own experiences, you may notice an improvement of that condition as Venus stations direct and starts moving back over this area that she has covered. And in some cases you may notice a return to the themes that you have encountered during this retrograde, because Venus is literally moving across that same section of the zodiac again. And so you may see certain things being repeated, but this time they should be they should be happening in such a way that they're leading towards resolution, generally. And something else to consider is, this conjunction that just happened with the Sun and Venus is called the inferior conjunction, because in this case Venus is between the Earth and the Sun. And the one that will come on the 26th of March in 2021 is called the superior conjunction, because at that point Venus will catch up to the Sun, I believe, in Aries, and will be the Sun will actually be between Venus and the Earth. And when that happens, Venus will once again disappear and will from our skies, our skies that are visible to us, and will then reappear as an evening star. And that's the beginning of the other half of her cycle. So in some ways, the superior conjunction we can think of as the full moon moment of Venus, and then she goes into this other phase that we're really are more familiar with, Venus as evening star. Last thing I would say is just, if you're wanting to kind of continue to work with Venus's morning star expression, I would really encourage you to seek out the stories that are linked to celestial beings that challenge authority, and also those that descend to Earth at some point, because this is what we would see if we were to observe the morning star after she reaches her greatest western elongation, which is on August 13th. So that's the furthest away that Venus is going to get from the Sun. And at that point there will be a change in the direction in which she's moving, and it'll appear like she is chasing after the Sun, so moving towards the Sun. But in our skies, it would appear like that star is what is descending towards the eastern horizon day by day, until it once again either goes under the horizon, we could think of it that way, into the underworld. But many stories also are linked to that celestial form coming to Earth. And, this does make me think of the many stories that are linked to angels that come to Earth and that are so taken by the daughters of men that they take on relationships with the daughters of men, and also are the ones, almost like in a Promethean way, are the ones that have taught us metallurgy and herbal lore, and also supposedly magic and various other things. So this is one story among many stories that is linked to this celestial form, and I think the stories are really important. So I leave that with you to kind of dig into, and if you ever would like me to spend a little bit more time making videos talking about these things, I'm more than happy to do it. Please let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. And the last thing I wanted to leave you with is talking about I always do these retrograde courses at least as a pair. Sometimes I also do some one-off events that are about Mercury's retrogrades, but I generally am covering Mercury's retrograde within the entire year. But the next one that is coming up, obviously, is the Mars retrograde, and this is happening in the late summer, early autumn. On the 28th, Mars will move into the sign of Aries, where Mars will have Mars is retrograde. Now, something to keep in mind is the way in which Mars, the retrograde, of course, is linked to Mars's solar phase cycle. So Mars will go retrograde on the 9th at 28 degrees of Aries. Now, while all this is going on the lead up to September the 9th, Mars is going to be squaring the planets that are in Capricorn. So that's Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto. And since the beginning of the year, I know I have, but many astrologers have been talking about it before that. Actually, I think I was first talking about it back in November of last year. But the fact that Mars will now be square those planets, and this signature for 2020 was one of those that was really highlighted as being quite important. I think also because these are the last Mars and Venus retrogrades before the triplicity change that's happening in the end of December of this year. I think these are really important retrogrades for the world, but also for us as individuals. So that course will be starting up towards the middle of August, but I'll have some more videos that I'll be sending out about Mars is retrograde as Mars moves into Aries, just because I think it's an important one for us to start preparing for and getting our collective minds around as it shifts into it. But that being said, this what's coming with the Mars retrograde is really where Mars will move into opposition to the Sun, and this opposition will occur on the 14th of October, and this is when Mars will start to appear super bright and super powerful in the sky, and will almost come to sort of rule the sky in a certain way at night. And because when the sun sets, Mars will rise, and Mars will be very bright and very red, and this is sort of like, again, this is in Mars's cycle with the sun. This is Mars's full moon expression that occurs during the retrograde for him. So there's a lot to explore there. We'll dive into the stories that are linked to it, and we'll do some journeying. There will also be magic that's related to different phases of the cycle there. So look forward to the sign up for that'll be coming out. So if you don't subscribe to my newsletter, please go to my website, and at the very bottom of my website you can subscribe to my newsletter there. Really powerful to hear all of your experiences. So until next time, keep it as light as you can be, and I wish you the best.